Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. And we're really happy to have with us Tim Sutton, and he's a co-founding partner of his firm. He spent 20 plus years as a litigator in Maryland, arguing deportation cases, defending the accused, handling hundreds of family law disputes. And 2 years ago, he and two partners left a large firm to build one from scratch. In under a year, Win Roche Sutton grew from 30 clients to over 150. I'm sure a lot more today. And Tim Sutton, on a personal note, is on a personal mission to visit every presidential gravesite and every Major League Baseball stadium in America. I want to ask you, I want to go pivot here. I want to ask you about the last two things because I think those are kind of interesting. So tell me about how did you get those two things in your mind, and what have you done so far?
I think it's just interesting that I just randomly come across the presidential grave sites. I went and visited my friend in Boston and ended up in Quincy for the day. And oh, look, there's John and Quincy right next to each other. And once you had those two, I in elementary school we went and visited Mount Vernon, and I'm randomly driving across the country, and then I end up in Abilene, Kansas, because it's on the way between Kansas City and Denver. And what you see the giant sign for the Eisenhower gravesite, you just stop. So that gets that going. And then I grew up in Baltimore in the '80s. So March. Well, Cal Ripken was never my favorite. Eddie Murray was always my favorite, and then Brooks Robinson. But I was 5 years old, March 1st, 1984, when the Mayflower trucks took the Colts out of town. So baseball was all I'd had as a youth. So that's where the baseball came in.
So are you a Ravens fan? Just as a side note.
Yeah, that's Ed Reed behind me. Yeah, Ravens fan. Yep.
Okay.
But you have to
Okay, great.
you have to figure something out when you don't have a football team and your team has been snatched from you.
So you left a large firm mid-career and founded Win Roche Sutton. What was the conversation like when you told people you were walking away from something stable to starting from nothing?
It's interesting that you phrase it that way because it wasn't necessarily stable. So there was it was a large firm, but it was going through a period of, how do I say this, turmoil. Let's say turmoil. That we had grown up through, like, when I started there, I started there in 2019. A bunch of us kind of started around 2019, kind of grew through COVID. I mean, looking back now, we don't talk about it, but COVID was a major influence on what happened for the first part of this decade. And, it's not really talked about that much, but we were kind of learning on the fly there with what was going on. The courts were shut down for months at a time, which, that led to, when you're a litigator and the courts are shut down, what are you doing? The only thing you're doing is kind of building that business up, getting new clients. They're frustrated because they can't get into court to get their cases heard. The cases you had before aren't going anywhere. So you're kind of learning things and you get closer as a team. And so that kind of happened. And then 5 years, 4 years later, that kind of relationship was, the firm tried to grow a little too fast, tried to not use the advantages that it had. And so we are all like, at that point, we're all kind of going in off in our different directions. So, you know, Aaron Roche and Jason Wynn, and we saw where that was going, and we're like, can we do this better? Can we do it in a different kind of way?
So tell me what your specials do. Each one of you bring something different to the or do you practice in different areas, or are you concentrated in primarily in one area? Tell me about your firm.
Yeah. So the way that we've never actually sought additional people to come in. Everyone is joined with us. It's all about building those relationships. You build the relationships you have. Six of our seven attorneys worked at that prior firm. Then we brought another attorney in. The attorney we brought in does business and estate planning. So, that's a very separate niche on what we do. We brought in a crim guy. He handles all of our crim work, does that crim department. Um, I'm trying to focus a little bit more on appellate litigation, do more of the appeals, do those kind of things. Jason handles the civil litigation aspect, more business disputes, things like that, zoning and real estate, those kinds of things. Erin now is the family law attorney, and she's the family law guru. We have two other attorneys, one doing family law kind of as a cash flow thing, but also doing more of the PI kind of thing and kind of specializing in that a little bit. And then we have our last attorney who's just banging out the family law cases that we get in and kind of supporting, everything from underneath.
So do you have some less stress? So I know at bigger law firms, and I don't know how big the last law firm you worked at, but at bigger law firms, then you have certain expectations. There's always stress to bring in more clients, more revenue, more, and there's a lot of administrative things that go along with working at a bigger law firm. What do you do to combat that kind of? You still have the same kinds of pressures. What do you do to work to make it a obviously you have a good working atmosphere, or you wouldn't have had seven other attorneys, to join your firm. What do you do to create that?
Well, I mean, I think the number one thing is kind of cutting some excess fat. That requires each attorney to do a little bit more in terms of some of the administrative stuff, some of the back end stuff, things like that. We have a grand total of one paralegal, and that is the extent of our administrative staff. So I think slimming, I mean, and we could probably use one or two, but a lot of the stuff we do is farmed out to other companies. We use virtual receptionists, we use a virtual collection agency. So things like that can get farmed out that we're not hiring for, keeps our, expenses lower, which means that more of the money that we bring in go into our pockets. So that's kind of that. So it's less of an actual load work. So there's more work on the administrative end, but less work on the legal end. So that kind of helps it a little bit. And there have been growing pains, and there's certainly, trying to figure out how to get clients, where to get clients, what kind of clients that we want. Um, those are all kinds of things that we're learning, and we have to learn, and we're still trying to figure those things out.
So you were in finance in your undergrad, right? And then how did you decide, okay, I want to actually become an attorney?
I mean, I majored in finance because I think, when you're in college and choosing a major, you want to pick something that sounds like it's a real job. And I, I probably would have gotten straight A's in poli sci with the less math, but I mean, but my minor in college was sports administration. So I took sports administration classes along with the finance classes. So, part of that was every Monday after the Masters, there was a golf tournament on campus. So we had to run the golf tournament. And then, this was in 97. I graduated high school. So 97, 98, 99, and then spring of 2000. So spring of 98, spring of 98, 9, and spring of 2000. So that's the height of the Tiger Woods era. And, we're bringing all these golfers to campus and, putting on this event and all of that kind of thing. So I'm like, how can I, get involved in sports? What can I do that? And like Jerry Maguire had just came out. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to be a sports agent. How do I become a sports agent? You go to law school. Went to law school. I do not have the temperament at all to be a sports agent. So I had to pivot and figure something else out from there.
What is the temperament to be a sports agent? Just out of curiosity, following that line.
Number one, you have to be extroverted, extremely extroverted. I am an incredible introvert generally. I've gotten much, much better at the networking aspect of the profession and the business building in just the last year and a half since starting your own law firm forces you to do that. Um, and so I think that's all part of it. But you have to be extroverted. You have to be attractive to clients and figure that out. And it's not necessarily a who's the smartest, but who's the most charismatic.
So your firm's tagline is "We start with the objective and work backwards to the strategy." So tell me how that's different than most law firms.
Well, I think part of what's different about us is that we have the capabilities from our big law experience and we have all of that. But like I said before, we have a grand total of one paralegal. If you're calling us, you're calling us and you're getting in touch with us. So it goes from the big picture but it also, we give that care. You get that personal touch. You know your lawyer, and you know what they think, and so your lawyer is able to directly give you the guidance, the big picture kind of guidance, because particularly in family law, which is right now our bread and butter, and is kind of that cash cow that we use to support our other endeavors. um, you, you need that big picture kind of strategy, because too often, much too often in family law, more than anything in particular, is that the emotion takes over. So, 99% of family law cases are about two issues. Neither one of them are the children. They are about control and they are about money. And so you kind of want to you get these parents who are mad at the other parent and you try and get revenge and things like that. Because otherwise, we're not getting involved. The attorneys aren't getting involved. So, you know, we don't really need to get involved. Those things kind of take care of themselves. It's when you're getting into those litigation channels, that's when the personal becomes more important than the overall goal. So, as family law attorneys, particularly, we have to look at the big picture. What's the best interest of the child? What is the court going to do? How is the court going to view your actions? You can do lots of things, muck up your case, and it's all based on emotion and not logic. So we have to kind of take that step back and guide you there.
So what's the most difficult thing about being in the middle of someone's worst day, which family law a lot of times is?
Taking it home. I mean, so, particularly with a lot of our clients, we get really attached to them. We get really, they become almost like our friends. We want to do the best for them, and it's hard. And then when they don't listen, and they don't listen, so then they blame you for when things go wrong. But you're just like, I'm not the one who filed the charges against your child's father. I'm not the one who prevented them from getting this $20 chandelier out of your house. And those are the kinds of things that, you take it with you. You take it personally because you want to get the best for these people, but sometimes they don't necessarily do the things that will allow that to happen.
So you've also represented immigrants facing deportation. Is that something that you still are involved in from
Oh,
time to time, or?
oh, absolutely not. No. I my proudest moment as an attorney was when I got an asylum application approved for this gentleman from El Salvador. He was a homosexual individual. He was terrorized. He was brutalized. He was assaulted, all of those things. And it was the full asylum. We got him everything. Um, and that was the last time I tried an immigration case. because you see the difference between trying immigration cases in 2016, trying immigration cases then up through 2019. Um, you know, just the difference in the laws, because the immigration is one of those areas of the law where administrative rules pretty much are the way that the cases are tried. So everything's based on administrative rules, which means that they change with every administration. So, and then the other problem is that you file cases and it takes years to get adjudicated. So there were a lot of cases that I had that were filed under the Obama administration that were adjudicated under Trump era rules. So, when you file a case under one set of laws, but the laws that you're actually trying the case under it's very, very different, very, very difficult, and it's almost impossible. And your clients don't understand. Well, we had an asylum case in 2015. Why don't I have an asylum case in 2019? Well, it's because the attorney general changed what the rules are. And so you can't explain to them, well, in 2015, women were a particular social group and domestic violence was torture and abuse under this case. And then Jeff Sessions said, no, it's not. So when you go to court, you have to try and figure something else out, and you really don't have a case at that point.
So you say you're passionate about appellate work and persuasive writing. What makes an appeal different from a regular trial, and why does it kind of get you excited to do the appellate work?
An appeal is different than a regular trial because it's kind of like a closed box puzzle. And a trial is an open box puzzle, right? So in an appeal, you only get to use what was in the trial court. So you have all of the evidence is already done. All of the argument has already been done. All of, what has been presented, all of that. So you can only use that. You have to figure out a way to change the outcome, or if you're being appealed against, keep the outcome the same, from the things that already happened. Whereas a trial, you have to go and find it. You have to go and find the evidence. You have to go and find the witnesses. You have to go and find the information, do the discovery, do the subpoenas, all of that, and then bring all of that in and make sure it gets in to court and figure out, how am I going to get it into court? How am I going to get this witness testimony into court so that it's not hearsay? Or how am I going to get these documents into court without this authentication? How am I going to, what is this witness saying X mean versus this witness saying Y? And how do we figure all that out? You don't have to do any of that with an appeal. You just have to take the facts as they are and put them together in a way that is most beneficial for your client.
So is it more challenging or less challenging, or just a different kind of challenging?
It can be more challenging because, appeals turn on two things. One is the standard of review, which means that, is the court looking at it freshly? Is it what's called de novo? Is it just looking at everything? Or is it an abuse of discretion standard? Do we have to say that the lower court could have done what they did and they have to abuse their discretion to overturn it? Then the other thing is, and appellate courts are notorious for this, was the issue preserved? You can argue for half an hour about the issue, but if you don't say I object again based on my prior argument, at the close of evidence, they may say it wasn't preserved. I've had that happen. When I make this great argument and then you can see that they're going with me on my argument, but then they try to find a way to say, no, it wasn't preserved, so you don't win.
That sounds frustrating.
It's incredibly frustrating because you can see it in the opinions they write, that when they agree with you, and like they're agreeing with you all of this way, and then they're saying, well, it wasn't preserved. You didn't make the right objection. You can't bring that up now. And so part of it is sometimes you're using the appellate court to try and make a different argument later on. I've done this a couple times where, in particular, and this only works in criminal cases, but it won't necessarily work in civil cases. But in criminal cases, you make the argument where this is what it should have happened. They're going to say it wasn't preserved, and then we then go back to the lower court and say that there was ineffective assistance of counsel because the trier, your client's former counsel didn't do what they were supposed to do to preserve the argument or make the argument. So we kind of set them up in such a way that it actually benefits we know we're going to lose the appeal, but we're setting up the appeal for further additional action. And that's kind of that's where that puzzle piece comes out.
So you're admitted to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court and the Fourth Circuit. What's it like to walk in the federal appellate courtroom for the first time?
I've never actually been in a federal appellate court. I've filed briefs in the federal appellate court, which is why I'm barred there. I've tried a case in the federal district court, but I've never actually tried in the federal appellate court. And the Supreme Court, I mean, you do that kind of out of an ego kind of thing, kind of just, hey, I'm barred in the Supreme Court. It takes emotion and the real benefit of being barred in the Supreme Court is, yes, I could file an appeal in the Supreme Court, but you get on the fast pass. So if you want to go watch an argument, you can go sit in the attorney gallery and not in the general public gallery. I have, yes. Oh, it's great. Yeah. You watch it and it's completely, because Supreme Court arguments aren't recorded, and you can watch a Maryland appeal online. I mean, I have plenty of appeals that I've done that are online, but you can't watch the Supreme Court argument because they're not recorded. They're not visually recorded. So it's actually quite amazing to see the interaction between the attorneys and the justices.
Well, give us a little insight on that. What was that, or what surprised you about when you went to the Supreme Court and listened to the arguments, both from the way that they were presented and the approach of the justices to their responses?
I think people think of the Supreme Court and they think of the famous cases, the popular cases, the well-known cases. The cases you actually want to go see argued are the regulatory cases, the ones that aren't going to get in the news, because those are the ones that are actually going to have more of a back and forth kind of thing, because they may not necessarily be 5-4. They may be like, there are cases that are 9-0 kind of thing, but you go watch, say, Paul Clement argue, and you see somebody who's done this hundreds of times in front of these people, probably have cocktails with them afterwards, and you can just tell the comfort level and knowing what's coming next. And then the Elizabeth Prelogar was the former Solicitor General, and when she did it, it was amazing. I mean, at that point, and she was representing the Biden administration, so she was losing all of these cases, in front of the Republican justices. But when she goes up there and you see her argue, it's incredible, and you learn how to do things. And then you watch the justices themselves. I mean, Justice Thomas was famous for not asking questions because he wanted to let the counselors argue their case. And and then you watch somebody like Alito ask questions, and it's a completely different vibe. And then it's a different vibe from Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch. They're all different kinds of vibes. You see their personalities come out in these questions.
They're all obviously all exceptionally bright, so I'm sure that part is interesting too. Here's some rapid fire questions for fun. How many states have you visited so far out of the 50?
38. It's an interesting one, but I would say Wilson.
Okay, where was that?
That's in the National Cathedral in DC.
Oh, okay. Best MLB stadium you've seen a game in?
Camden Yards. That's just the answer. That is the best stadium that there is.
Homer. Okay, I appreciate that. Which continent are you skipping and why? Where did I get that question from?
I
Continent.
I don't know. I probably won't go to Antarctica. I will say that.
I'm going to cross that off, even though I already asked it. Best legal movie or show?
I mean, there are a couple of traditional answers here. Um, you know, I use when I was at the old firm, I was one of the older attorneys, one of the supervising attorneys, and I used movie clips to try and teach some of the younger attorneys how to do um, courtroom procedures, direct examination, cross examination, examination of witnesses, and I used My Cousin Vinny more than anything else. So that was a great one. But
Go ahead. I want to hear the other one.
but I mean, and then you use To Kill a Mockingbird for your direct exam when Atticus is cross-examining Tom Robinson, and you still see he's doing everything he's supposed to do, but it doesn't really much matter. But the real interesting one that gets kind of lost in the shuffle is The Verdict with Paul Newman, where he's kind of an alcoholic, and he's got everything against him, but he's still trying to get this personal injury case in Boston for his clients.
And I know I've seen that, but I can't remember it. I think I've seen every Paul Newman show, but it's funny that you brought up. So I sometimes will ask that same question, and I've gotten uh, my cousin Vinny multiple times. I think because people, his observation powers in the courtroom while things were going on were what moved the needle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that that's like I was saying earlier. That's why it's an open puzzle box. The trial is the open puzzle, and that's where he's pulling. Particularly when he's doing the cross examination of Marissa Tomei, when he's bringing these pictures out that nobody had put together, but proved the innocence. And it's like you had the images the entire time, and then nobody thought to look at them with an eye to solve the actual puzzle.
So your firm emphasizes diversity as a strategic advantage, not just a value. Can you give a specific example where having diverse perspectives change the outcome for a client?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you know Jason is the children of immigrants from Vietnam after the war, and came over as his parents were on our side, and then that war, and then we came over, and then Aaron is from a very large Florida family, and kind of has more leftist views, and Matt is incredibly on, former college Republican and things like that. So we have a wide view of diverse opinions and viewpoints and immigrants and women and all of those things. And I think part of it is that we banter a lot about how cases should be done and how they need to be done and what can be done. Like, for example, Aaron has this case with an immigrant who lives in Oklahoma. Her husband, or former husband, is in St. Mary's County, Maryland, and the judges down there are, shall we say, a bit more conservative. Um, and it's just, how do we work through these different people that come to us? First of all, our clientele is completely and utterly diverse because a lot of it comes through the internet. And then so you have these individual people coming in and trying to figure out which attorney is going to work best with them. And then you have the Maryland is, most of the judges at this point were probably appointed by Hogan. So they're a little more conservative than you would expect in a state like Maryland, particularly in the western, southern, and eastern part of the state. So You need that little perspective. You need, how do we help our clients from a, you know, all kinds of ways. I'm currently representing in a federal lawsuit, a women's organization called Her Resiliency Center. We're suing the governor in that, because the governor didn't help victims of human trafficking enough, and cut off the funding to this organization that all they do is help victims of human trafficking. So, that that's kind of how our diversity helps us, because we're able to see different perspectives and go around. And if you watch our team's messages, they're just bouncing back and forth. And anybody have ever done this? Anybody have experience with this? And so it kind of helps all of it, and having different perspectives on things absolutely helps our clients.
So, where can people find you, learn more about your firm, or reach out if they need help?
Our firm is on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And our website is www.winroche, N-Y-N, what is it? NGUYENROCHE.com.
Okay, thanks a lot for coming on, Tim. Hang with me for just a second.
All right, no worries.